The road ends this weekend in San Antonio, and we're getting you ready for it right now on Big E's Shootaround from New York City. Hey everybody, John Fanta with you, and you know it. Over 350 teams get ready in November. Only 4 now remain for a shot for that national championship. And one of those 4 is the team that has won more than anybody in college basketball in the last half-decade, that has broken the Division I record for wins in a 4-year span, passing Duke this past weekend, 134 wins in the last 4 years for the Villanova Wildcats. And now they take on Kansas on Saturday night in San Antonio. We've got a jam-packed show. Fox's Steve Lavin and Tim Brando are going to join me. CBS's Matt Norlander will break down Villanova, what makes them so successful, all that and more, and I want your prediction. Here's a couple of questions that I want to see you guys answer. Feel free to comment on Periscope and Facebook. 1, who's that X factor for you heading into the Final Four for Villanova? Who's got to step up for them? We're going to get to that. 2, Chris Mack heading to Louisville. What do you think of Xavier's head coaching position? Feel free to chime in on who you think could be that successor. And 3, off-season storylines. What's your off-season storyline? We're going to get to Q&A deeper into this show, but first, we start with Villanova. This past weekend in Boston, the program making history, and it started on Friday night. A tough West Virginia team, folks. West Virginia was on. West Virginia led by 6 with 11 minutes to go, with the calming presence of the Wildcats, then led into Sunday. And against Texas Tech, what a defensive performance. What a job done by Eric Paschal with the double-double. And Villanova heading to the Final Four for the second time in 3 years. This, the greatest era in Villanova basketball's history. You're watching it right now. And look at the past guys. These current players saying, we play for the ones who came before us? Well, Josh Hart, all over it. And the Fortnite King, no, when Nova's on, the world stops spinning, even Fortnite. Chris Jenkins, hey, the Wildcats know a thing or two about winning in Texas, folks. They did it just a couple of years ago as we now set the stage for this matchup. And we're going to take a deeper dive later in the show. But, folks, you're going to see tons of three-point shooting. I think the team that can limit the other from beyond the arc is the difference maker in this one. Take a look at those KenPom defensive ratings. And Villanova is one of the best defensive teams in America. And this one also features a battle between 2 Naismith finalists in Jalen Brunson, in Devontae Graham, 2 conductors of their respective trains. And I want to see what we get out of that matchup. I want to see what we get out of Amari Spellman and Udoka Azubuike. I am fascinated to see when Spellman is on the offensive end of the floor, he spaces it tremendously well. Can he pull Azubuike out on him? Can he say, come here, big fella, and make Azubuike guard him? On the other side, Azubuike's a 7-foot tree. He's a big man. And down low, Villanova needs to have a formula to be able to stop him. I am really intrigued to see that here as we head to our fast break. Chris Mack heading to Louisville. So that prompts a search now as Xavier begins that. And Musketeer AD Greg Christopher, I want you to see this, Musketeer fans. Here's what he had to say about Chris Mack's send-off, but also where the program goes from here.
Certainly wish that Chris would still be our head coach, but I also understand the desire for a new challenge. Chris may end up being on a new sideline, but I mean, he's our all-time winningest coach, did a lot of great things here as a player, as an assistant coach, as a head coach. And I mean, at the end of the day, he's always going to be a Musketeer. At the end of the day, this program's been built by over 4 decades, really, with great coaches, great players, great administrators who have helped build it to where it is. So I would hope a program transcends any one single person. Now, our all-time winningest coach is really important. It was a big part of that, and He deserves a lot of credit, both as a player and assistant and head coach. So, again, we wish him the best as he moves forward.
Chris Mack taking Xavier to 4 Sweet 16s, an Elite 8 appearance last year. And what stands out to me is this place has always had my heart, and he said it, there's always going to be a place in his heart with Xavier. Thanking the community, and how about the way he ended it, folks? He's always going to be against those Bearcats. I will be cheering for the Muskies every chance I get, especially on that night once a year. We beat those guys from Clifton. There is no question about it. Chris Mack, his legacy is more than powerful at Xavier. The all-time winningest coach for the Musketeers, and it's tough. Yesterday was a difficult day for Musketeer fans. But I'm here to say this today. Take a look at Najee Marshall, Paul Scruggs, what's in place. We'll see which direction they will go. But you listen to Greg Christopher, really strong AD, and was so confident in the future of the Musketeers. This is a Xavier program that's been to 12 of the last 13 NCAA tournaments. 12 of the last 13. They're going to be A-OK. The future will be fine at the Cintas Center. Xavier fans, you trust in what the process will hold, because I think that this program will continue to carry on. And Chris Mack even said it after the NCAA tournament loss to Florida State. If you think that Xavier basketball's taken a big step back, you haven't been around Xavier basketball. So watch out for what's to come here as we turn from the Musketeers to the Dogs. We're just going down the road to Butler. Laval Jordan, this is why Twitter is great. You have to love this here. Mike White, congrats on a great season. Could we get you a home and home? Mike White says, of course. Dogs going to Gainesville. Gators will come to Hinkle. And then Lavelle says, hey, I'll fire up my fax machine. Now, I'd like to see that fax machine at Hinkle Fieldhouse. Hinkle Fieldhouse is, well, I'm sure there's a fax machine somewhere now. Is it working? We'll have to see. Knock on the wood, but isn't that cool? Dogs in Gainesville next year, and then Florida coming to Butler the following season. That is so crucial in college hoops, to schedule teams that you don't have to schedule. In this conference, you've got legit matchups across the board. It's what you do in the non-con that can separate you when it comes to Selection Sunday. So cool to see Laval Jordan and Mike White linking up with their respective programs, Butler and Florida, next year, as we turn to All-Americans in the Big East. And 7 players in total getting honored in some capacity. There's 2 of them shaking hands right there, and Jalen Brunson, the first-teamer, Trayvon Blewett on the second team, and then Mikal Bridges, the two-way Swiss Army knife, if you will, on the third team, with 4 honorable mentions. And I think that speaks to what the conference loses. There is no doubt there's a wealth of stars that you're going to see now depart at the next level, get to the NBA or go overseas and play. It's going to be interesting to see who can fill those shoes. Who's that next generation? And we've got some off-season questions coming up. Send in your questions. What's your prediction for Villanova, Kansas? I want to hear it right now. Comment below here. As you know, my partner, Jay Alter, he'll be with you in San Antonio along with myself. We're heading out tomorrow, and we're going to be with you at the Alamo Dome starting tomorrow with press conferences and all kinds of things. But first, to set the stage for this Villanova-Kansas showdown, we got to look back to the past and see what they've done.
When Villanova and Kansas square off in San Antonio in the Final Four, it'll be the 3rd time in the last 5 years Jay Wright and Bill Self have met up. The last 2 meetings, well, you'll remember the latest one. It was in 2016 in the Elite 8 just 2 years ago. Villanova, a 2-seed, beat the top-seeded Kansas Jayhawks 64-59 en route to the national championship. But an even more memorable meeting, at least to me, Villanova and Kansas at the Battle for Atlantis in 2013. Villanova, unranked, no expectations. Kansas, the number 2 team in the country with players like Joel Embiid, Andrew Wiggins, Frank Mason, and Perry Ellis. But on that day, it was Ryan Arcidiacono, at that point an unknown guard, who hit a corner 3 to stun a loaded Jayhawks team. This was before Villanova was in the national title conversation. And when you talk about that game, many people would tell you it changed the way Villanova basketball looked at themselves. Many people believe that win was used as a launching pad, and Villanova has not looked back since that battle for Atlanta's title, which came in the way of a win against that Jayhawks team. Now it comes full circle. 5 years later, Villanova and Kansas meet, both as 1 seeds and in the national title conversation seemingly every year. The good news for Nova Nation, if you look at the last 2 matchups between these 2 teams, you feel pretty good.
Two of those wins over Kansas, those are 2 of the 164 that Villanova has totaled the last 5 years. As we turn to the schedule, folks, it's a loaded one that goes beyond the Wildcats. How about starting Thursday? Tomorrow night, this is going to be televised on ESPN2 at 9 Eastern. Trayvon Blewett, Marcus Foster, Andrew Rousey, they're lighting up in the three-point contest. Then Foster and Desi Rodriguez will be playing in the Reese's College All-Star Game. That is Friday afternoon and will be broadcast on CBS Sports Network at 4:30 Eastern. 3-on-3 tournament featuring that dynamic duo. You're going to see them again, Blewett and Makura, with Desi and Andrew Rousey. And then the Villanova Wildcats. There's their schedule, folks. We will have complete coverage. You can follow us on Twitter at Big East MBB. We'll be retweeting the press conference live, getting in the locker room, hearing from both Villanova and Kansas. And then Saturday night, 8:49 Eastern Time, it is the Wildcats and the Jayhawks. As we'll be live with you Saturday morning. We've had a lot of Saturday shows throughout the season. We love having you. So start your Final Four Saturday with us, 11 a.m. Eastern Time on Saturday from San Antonio to set the stage for the Wildcats and the Jayhawks. As you've heard from me, you've heard from Jay Alter, let's get the media whip around. We got a cast of 1,000 breaking down the Villanova-Kansas showdown. Let's get the coach's perspective on this Final Four showdown between Villanova and Kansas. We welcome in Fox College hoops analyst Steve Lavin. And Coach, you went to a Final Four back when you were an assistant at UCLA. So how does one approach this week from a coaching perspective?
Well, I think most important is you try and keep your team as much as possible in the same routine or the same rhythm that you've had through the postseason. That's why you've been successful. So you want to replicate or duplicate as much as possible the same routines because teams, players are creatures of habit, and coaches are the same way. And it doesn't guarantee success, but you're more likely to have success if you can duplicate or replicate those routines. So in terms of when you're waking up, your pregame meals, your walkthroughs and skull sessions in terms of video, scouting reports, going over the game planning. And you also have to be careful at this stage of the season to not overload or overcoach.
Coach, you've seen this reconfigured Big East in these last 5 years as a coach at St. John's, now with Fox Sports as a broadcaster. Why has Jay Wright been at the top of not only the league, but the country?
Well, I think Jay is a flexible thinker. And so while he has certain tenets, kind of building blocks or the fundamentals, the core values of how he's built his program at Villanova in terms of team play, fundamentals, defense, togetherness, those elements are in play. But year to year, he's shown a great propensity to adapt to his personnel, to adjust or modify what they do offensively and defensively based upon his particular group of players that he's working with.
And we're now joined by CBSSports.com's Matt Norlander to break down Villanova. And Matt, you wrote yesterday that this might be the best team in program history. Why do you say that?
Hey, it's great to be with you. I say it because this team's offense alone validates that claim. In fact, in the history of KenPom's database, which is KenPom.com, which measures all sorts of modern metrics and tempo-free metrics. Right now, Villanova is the best offense overall, and it's actually the second best offense since 2001-2002. The only offense that was better was the Wisconsin offense that got to the Final Four a few years back. And when you look at how well balanced Villanova is, and you consider the fact that a lot of the players that were on that national championship winning team from 2016 are on this team as well. And, oh, by the way, the team that won that title was a 2 seed versus this team, which is a 1 seed. I think that this team has all the pieces there, is good enough on defense to lay validity to that claim. But I understand that from a mainstream, widespread perspective, if Villanova is to lose against Kansas on Saturday, then the 2016 team will be remembered as a greater team than this one. And I totally get that, and I think that's totally fair. But if we're really going to look at the scope of an entire season, I think right now this team has a solid case for it. Obviously, the intriguing thing about this, if you really want to continue to weigh one against the other, is this year's team did not win the Big East regular season title, whereas the 2016 team did. But guess what? The 2016 team did not win the Big East tournament title. This team did. So there is some pros and cons with each one. Either way, they're obviously two fantastic squads, and I can't wait to see the Wildcats go up against the Jayhawks on Saturday night.
The best in the Big East, the best in the Big 12. Villanova and Kansas. They both do so much well. What's the deciding factor in this showdown?
I think the deciding factor in this game is going to be the ability for Omari Spellman to get Azubuike away from the basket and into foul difficulty, because he is a rim protector that causes all kinds of havoc. He was an issue, no doubt about it. He was an issue in that game. If you look back at Bagley's numbers against Duke, he didn't get many looks at the goal. I mean, there weren't many shots taken by the best player on the floor, Marvin Bagley. I think part of the reason was Azubuike's presence. Now, He left the game, and he did ultimately foul out, which did not surprise me because of the nature of having to deal with those multiple bigs. And, Duke's got 3 of them that he had to deal with. But I think Spellman's play, John, is vital in this game, that he not only make a few shots from, the wing. He loves that wing 3. He makes a few of those and then can put the ball on the deck and drive to the basket, get Azubuike away from the hoop. That's really going to help him. DeSosa is obviously a strong player. We know what Newman can do from 3, but Villanova's got more answers in terms of offensive weaponry, and everybody's going to be talking about Brunson, obviously, and the Kansas guard. That's going to be the theme going into the game all week long. That's what you're going to hear. But I think ultimately it's going to come down to the impact Spellman has on Azubuike, because he is absolutely a dominant rim protector, and I think Spellman's gotten better at that. He had a few swats himself, over the weekend in the game that was so important, really, against Texas Tech. He needed to make a few of those, but I think Omari is going to be the key in this game with that matchup with Azubuike.
Thanks again to Steve Lavin, Tim Brando, Matt Norlander for breaking down the Final Four showdown between Villanova and Kansas. You can go to @BigEastMBB on Twitter. We'll be posting snippets from those interviews throughout the afternoon as we've got mail. Let's open up the mailbag here and get to your questions. I asked you guys yesterday, and once again, we had a bunch of questions. We start with Villanova. And I think that this is a really interesting question here from Jeffrey, who says, can we get rid of the whole narrative about Villanova being an early exit team? I was watching Jay Wright last night with Scott Van Pelt on SportsCenter. Thought, as always, SVP's interview was great. And I'll dig in here, folks. Jay brought it up. In this structure of the tournament, you've got the Missouri Valley, the Big East, the Big Ten, and the Big 12 in the Final Four. There is an element here where 18 to 22-year-olds for 40 minutes might just not have it. I think that's the scary thing about Villanova is they didn't shoot the ball well at all on Sunday against Texas Tech, and they made up for it on the defensive end. They made up for it on the glass. They had 51 rebounds in the game. 51. There's a human element. especially with teenagers, where you just don't have your game. Last year when they lost to Wisconsin, tough matchup, couldn't make threes. Sometimes it's not your day. That's basketball. That's the beauty of the tournament, where you just don't have your game. Look what happened with Arizona against Buffalo. They came out and they got blown out. They didn't have it. So that whole narrative, Jay Wright brought it up to SVP. We get so too high, too low. I think that heading into this weekend, everybody's like, well, Villanova's done it before. They just did it 2 years ago. So now the expectation is they're going to do it again. Who knows? You're going up against heavyweights. There's a reason why these 4 teams are here. It comes down to more than just luck or more than just Sister Jean for Loyola. They play really sharp basketball. But on the flip side of the card, folks, when you're dealing with 18 to 22-year-olds, you could come out and just not have your day. So that's my response to Jeffrey's question. I don't buy either side of the narrative. I buy the fact that Villanova has accounted for over 160 wins in the last 5 years, and this is the greatest era in their basketball program's history. Let's turn to our next question here. Seton Hall, the Pirates. What's ahead in the offseason? Rick says, what are your thoughts on next year? Who becomes the point guard? Emergence of Miles Powell. Okay. The impact of Torian Thompson is the key element to Seton Hall's season next year. He needs to fill the hole left by Angel Delgado, who, yes, is irreplaceable as the Big East's all-time leading rebounder. It can't just be Torian Thompson. But the Syracuse transfer's role is huge for next year's team and for the Pirates' hopes of trying to get to another NCAA tournament. Miles Powell has blossomed into a star. That's the known for this Seton Hall team. He can light it up from deep. The reason why he was the Big East's most improved player is because he could drive to the hole this year. He can affect a game in more ways than just shooting. Right here. There's an example of him dashing through the lane. Teams weren't ready for that this year. That's why he caught a lot of teams by surprise defensively. But Powell's big, and in terms of the point guard, I believe that the Pirates are going to be getting a grad transfer. They're definitely in that market. They will be looking to get a grad transfer. And then in terms of recruits who they have coming in, Anthony Nelson is somebody that could give them something good at the guard spot. A lot of people are raving about him. And then Quincy McKnight, Sacred Heart transfer, sat out last year. He'll be available for them next year. But I don't think Kevin Willard's done yet. He and his staff will be working hard to continue to build the roster with the pieces that are already in place. Let's go to Queens, right? St. John's. If Shamari Pons returns to St. John's next year, how good could the Red Storm be? Justin Simon and Marvin Clark are the maturity pieces for this team. They're the leaders. St. John's has got to be able to move the ball successfully. They just don't do it well enough. They get into hero ball too often. I'm looking for them to take that next step. I do think that Pons could very well be back. That's the beauty of the NBA draft process. It's what it is. You want to test the water, see what agents tell you, see what they tell you, and then you judge whether you can go or stay at your university. Pons is a super freak of a guard. He can do it all. Now can they put it together with Simon and Clark, and then we'll see what St. John's can do on top of that. They have Mikey Dixon coming in, who they're very high on. There's no lack of athleticism with this team. It's about playing team basketball, finishing games. They were so close so many times in that 0 for start to Big East play. Let's see if they can put it together next year. They'll be another year older. Critical year for the Red Storm. Creighton, speaking of being another year older, with the emergence of the freshman Jays, Ballack, Alexander, Epperson, how do you see their experience this season carry over into next season? Well, first and foremost, before we get to those freshmen, Martin Crumple, his injury really impacted the Blue Jays season. And his return is so crucial for them because he is a matchup nightmare for opposing defenses. But Ballack, Alexander, they got really good minutes. Ballack is wise beyond his years. When I talk to Mitch, he's very mature. He's a perfect Greg McDermott player. Love his ability to affect the game from the perimeter. And I think Epperson has NBA draft potential down the road. They're so high on him. He just needs to put some muscle on. I think trip to the gym is going to be big time for him in the offseason. They're going to develop his game. But he's got the intangibles that you love. That size, that ability to shoot from beyond the arc. These guys are going to be big time for Creighton. I love this freshman class from this past season and think that they'll continue to grow next year. And Creighton can go back to the NCAA tournament despite losing Marcus Foster and potentially losing Kyrie Thomas. I still think that there are pieces in place for them to be successful. But we shall see. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy, that's for sure. I do like this team a lot, though, as we take you up to 1:30 here on Big East Shootaround. Creighton's going to be okay. I think Seton Hall's going to be okay. St. John's needs to take that next step. We should see what will happen because there's teams in the middle here who have some questions to answer, and it makes for a fascinating offseason. Any final questions, feel free to send them to me. We are going to be live with you on Saturday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, San Antonio, to set the stage for Villanova and Kansas. I cannot wait for Jalen Brunson, Devontae Graham. Can't wait for Omari Spellman, Udoka Azubuike. This is what it's all about. The best in the Big East, the best in the Big 12, going at it with Loyola and Michigan on the other side. For a basketball purist, it's a picture-perfect Final Four. We are off to the Alamo tomorrow. Feel free to chime in at John_Fanta, at Big East MBB, at JAlter Sports. We got a layover, so we'll be at the airport. We take your questions. And then Shootaround's live Saturday. We got you covered all weekend. Shootaround is San Antonio bound. See you at the Final Four